January 17, 1943. The sky over northern Germany is a pale gray, brittle with winter cold. From the north, a low hum rises, a formation of American B-17 flying fortresses slicing through the clouds like steel birds on a mission no one had thought possible. German radar operators squint at the screen, incredulous. These machines, loaded with hundreds of pounds of bombs and bristling with defensive guns, had flown farther than anyone predicted, enduring hours of exposure to freezing winds and relentless flak. Above them, Luftwaffe pilots tighten their grips on throttle and joystick, straining to intercept. They glance at each other, disbelief etched into faces streaked with frost and oil. How could these Americans stay aloft so long, unbroken, unyielding, seemingly invincible? Below, fields of snow and small villages await their unseen verdict. Somewhere in the formation, a bombardier adjusts his goggles, scanning for the target, while engines roar in a steady, unshakable rhythm that seems almost impossible to counter. Every heartbeat, every mile, every second in the air tells a story of endurance that German pilots cannot yet comprehend. A story that will reshape the skies forever. By 1942, the skies over Europe had become a battlefield unlike any before. The United States Army Air Forces, still building its strength in England, faced a daunting question. How could they strike at the heart of Nazi Germany without crippling losses? The solution emerged from the belief in precision, endurance, and formation discipline. Daylight strategic bombing. Unlike the British Royal Air Force, which relied heavily on nighttime raids to reduce casualties, American planners wagered that daylight missions would allow their crews to identify targets accurately, striking industrial centers, rail yards, and factories vital to the German war effort. The 8th Air Force, headquartered in East Anglia, England, became the spearhead of this vision. Thousands of young Americans, some barely out of their teens, trained on the B-17 Flying Fortress and B-24 Liberator, aircraft designed not only to carry heavy payloads but to survive punishment in the sky. The B-17, nicknamed the Flying Fortress, was bristling with defensive guns, 50 caliber Browning machine guns, capable of covering every approach. Its rugged design allowed it to absorb flak, enemy fire, and mechanical failures, keeping crews alive when all seemed lost. Early missions over France and the Low Countries exposed both the potential and the peril. German radar and fighter intercepts were formidable, and the Luftwaffe, at that point stretched across multiple fronts, responded with organized squadrons of Messerschmitt Bf-109s and Focke-Wulf Fo-190s. German pilots quickly recognized the Americans' reliance on tight formations. These combat boxes, where aircraft flew in precise geometric patterns, allowed overlapping fields of fire. For the Luftwaffe, the sight of dozens of bombers advancing like a single unbroken entity was both awe-inspiring and terrifying. Pilots had to contend not only with enemy flak from below, but the concentrated defensive fire from each bomber. American doctrine emphasized not just aircraft, but endurance and morale. Missions could last 8 hours or more, pushing men and machines to their limits. The crews learned to manage fatigue, cold, and the constant threat of death with a grim professionalism. Each engine checked, each gun position manned, each formation held, contributed to a system that could project power deep into enemy territory. The Luftwaffe's early encounters revealed a critical flaw in conventional thinking. German pilots could no longer rely on single aircraft engagements. To inflict damage, they had to coordinate attacks on formations, timing strikes perfectly, while avoiding the overlapping fields of American gunners. The first major raids targeting industrial cities, such as Rouen and Le Havre demonstrated both the courage and vulnerability of the 8th Air Force. Losses were high, planes shot down, crews captured, but the Americans learned quickly. Each mission honed tactics, improved formation discipline, and taught the Luftwaffe an uncomfortable lesson: these bombers would not break easily. By mid-1943, intelligence reports from German observers noted the astonishing endurance of the aircraft. Pilots remarked on the B-17's ability to absorb damage, maintain altitude, and continue toward its target even when crippled. In private communications, Luftwaffe officers admitted their growing respect, tinged with disbelief, for these flying machines and the men who operated them. Strategically, the decision to fly during daylight was a gamble. Anti-aircraft defenses, flak cannons, searchlights, and radar-guided batteries remained deadly. German fighter tactics evolved rapidly, concentrating on head-on attacks, coordinated dive, bombing maneuvers, and attempts to disrupt formations. Yet even as the Luftwaffe improved, American endurance and formation discipline remained a constant. The physical limits of the bombers themselves became a psychological weapon. German pilots, witnessing planes return battered, but still aloft, began to question how much longer their efforts could dominate the skies. By late 1942, a pattern emerged. The Germans were astonished not only by the bombers' ability to reach distant targets, but by their resilience under fire. Crews faced anti-aircraft artillery that shredded the sky with black smoke and metal, yet the bombers pressed on. Reports from intercepted communications captured the awe in German voices. These Americans were capable of missions that seemed beyond human and mechanical endurance. This was no mere technical superiority. It was a combination of training, discipline, and design that transformed the skies into a proving ground where only the most resolute survived. Even in the cold, gray mornings over occupied Europe, the contrast was clear. While German pilots struggled to anticipate and intercept, American crews advanced steadily, engines thumping like relentless drums. Every mile flown deepened the Germans' disbelief. By the time the first bombs fell on the industrial heart of the Reich, it was already evident the skies had changed, and a new standard of endurance had been set. The stage was set for the escalation of strategic raids, where both sides would test the limits of men and machines, and where German pilots would confront the unthinkable reality of American bomber resilience. By the spring of 1943, the daylight bombing campaign had evolved into a precise, grueling test of endurance for both men and machines. The B-17 Flying Fortress and the B-24 Liberator were no longer just aircraft, they were instruments of strategy, engineered to survive the long haul across hostile skies. The B-17's four powerful engines allowed it to maintain altitude even after taking heavy flak or sustaining multiple engine hits. The B-24, with its longer range and heavier bomb load, complemented the B-17, allowing American planners to reach targets once considered untouchable. Pilots and crews quickly learned to treat every mission as a calculation in survival: fuel consumption, wind resistance, enemy positioning, and formation integrity all dictated life or death. Crew training emphasized endurance under stress. Pilots practiced long sorties over English training fields, learning to manage fuel, navigate through clouds, and maintain formation under simulated attacks. Gunners drilled for hours, perfecting coordination with adjacent planes to create overlapping fields of fire. Bombardiers trained relentlessly with Norden bomb sights, instruments so precise they could drop bombs from 20,000 feet with remarkable accuracy, even under turbulence and enemy fire. Each crew member became a part of a tightly synchronized machine. Human nerves, mechanical reliability, and tactical coordination fused into one unit capable of feats that stunned their adversaries. The combat box formation became central to this endurance. Aircraft flew staggered, layered patterns designed to maximize defensive fire coverage. Enemy fighters approaching from any angle risked crossing the concentrated fire of multiple planes. German pilots quickly recognized that isolated attacks were suicidal. A head-on assault offered the Luftwaffe the best chance to penetrate these formations, but even then, the defensive fire could shred wings or destroy engines before the attackers closed in. In effect, the Americans had turned vulnerability into strength. The very presence of multiple bombers together created a fortress in the sky that could endure punishment far beyond what conventional wisdom predicted. Luftwaffe responses were varied but increasingly desperate. Fighter wings, coordinated complex interception patterns, often guided by radar to predict the bomber formation's flight paths. Experienced pilots experimented with dive and climb attacks, head-on passes, and simultaneous flanking maneuvers, seeking to exploit any weakness in formation discipline. Anti-aircraft flak grew heavier, particularly over industrial zones. The Germans calculated trajectories meticulously, adjusting altitudes and timing bursts to coincide with the approaching formations. Yet, the durability of American bombers often rendered these attacks only partially effective. Even planes riddled with flak could limp forward, engines smoking, bombs intact, until reaching their target. The psychological component of endurance became as critical as the physical. American crews faced freezing temperatures in unheated cockpits, oxygen masks icing over at 25,000 feet, and the ever-present threat of death from flak or fighters. Yet the men pressed on, guided by training, duty, and the understanding that hesitation could cost not only their own lives, but the success of the mission. German pilots, conversely, confronted a growing sense of frustration and disbelief. Reports describe Luftwaffe veterans staring in awe as formations remained intact despite concentrated attacks, engines still humming, guns still blazing. The notion that an aircraft could absorb so much punishment and keep flying challenged all previous assumptions about aerial combat. By mid-1943, endurance had become a defining feature of American daylight bombing doctrine. The success of long-range missions relied not only on aircraft and tactics but on human fortitude. Each sortie tested limits of machinery, of nerve, of coordination. Crews emerged exhausted but unbroken, contributing to a cumulative reputation that both intimidated and angered the Luftwaffe. Intercept reports, pilot memoirs, and post-mission debriefs all recorded the same astonishment. American bombers simply refused to fall out of the sky, even under conditions that would have grounded lesser machines. These developments laid the groundwork for larger raids, deeper penetrations into German territory, and confrontations that would test the limits of endurance more than ever. The Germans were learning a hard truth. Survival depended not only on skill, but on an almost mechanical resilience that American aircraft and crews displayed in relentless, awe-inspiring fashion. The stage was now set for multiple angles of this phenomenon to unfold. From human experience to tactical brilliance, technological ingenuity, and the leadership that orchestrated it all. At 25,000 feet, in the freezing metal shell of a B-17, human endurance was tested to its absolute limits. Pilots gripped icy controls, their hands numb despite gloves, while the deafening roar of 4 engines filled every available space. Gunners perched in tail, nose, and waist positions endured biting winds that cut through flight suits, their eyes scanning endlessly for the telltale silhouettes of Messerschmitts. Bombardiers hunched over the Norden bombsight, every flick of their wrist a calculation of life or death. The monotony of the long flight was punctuated by flashes of anti-aircraft fire or enemy tracers, jolting men into instantaneous action. Fatigue and fear became constant companions, yet crews adapted, drawing strength from each other. Endurance was not just mechanical, it was profoundly human, a testament to training, discipline, and sheer willpower. The American approach to daylight bombing relied heavily on the tight coordination of formations. The combat box arrangement was designed to maximize overlapping fields of fire, creating a protective lattice against enemy fighters. The tactical brilliance of this method lay in its simplicity. A single bomber might be vulnerable, but a formation of 20 or 30, moving as one, presented a fortress of firepower. German pilots quickly realized the danger of isolation. Any plane that strayed became a target. Maintaining formation required constant vigilance, precise adjustments, and trust between crews, who often had never flown together before. The formation itself became a force multiplier, demonstrating endurance, not only in physical flight, but in collective tactical discipline. The B-17 and B-24 were masterpieces of engineering optimized for endurance. The B-17's rugged frame could absorb flak punctures, shattered windows, and even partial wing damage while maintaining altitude. Fuel systems were redundant. Control cables could be repaired in midair. Engines ran hours beyond normal operational expectations, and defensive guns were strategically positioned to cover all approaches. The B-24, longer, ranged and heavier, allowed the Americans to reach deeper targets, with its bomb load matching or exceeding that of the B-17. German pilots often reported disbelief at aircraft returning from missions with wings bent, engines smoking, or gun turrets shattered, yet still completing their objectives. The technical resilience of these machines became a psychological weapon, reinforcing the impression that the Americans could endure what others could not. Endurance in the air depended not only on individual crews, but on strategic leadership. Brigadier General Ira C. Eaker, commanding the 8th Air Force, emphasized precision, planning, and relentless training. Mission planners studied maps, weather reports, and enemy radar patterns with painstaking attention to detail. Leaders coordinated long-range flights, ensuring that formations left England at exact times, maintaining altitude and speed across hundreds of miles of hostile airspace. Squadron leaders made split-second decisions in the air, adjusting formations to respond to unexpected flak concentrations or fighter attacks. The ability of commanders to anticipate threats, communicate clearly, and instill confidence was critical. Men flying in freezing cockpits relied not only on their aircraft, but on the judgment of officers who orchestrated every aspect of the mission, ensuring that endurance was not merely mechanical, but strategic. German pilots were forced to confront the extraordinary resilience of American bombers. Memoirs from Luftwaffe veterans describe disbelief at seeing B-17s with engines damaged or fuselages riddled by flak, yet continuing toward their targets. Their astonishment often turned to frustration, as traditional interception tactics proved increasingly ineffective. Commanders experimented with massed fighter wings, head-on attacks, and synchronized dive and climb maneuvers, yet the sheer durability of the aircraft and disciplined formations forced them to reconsider engagement strategies. German reconnaissance reports noted that the Americans' ability to endure damage and maintain formation was a new reality in aerial warfare. Each successful bombing mission returned aircraft, and unbroken formation eroded Luftwaffe confidence, while redefining their understanding of air combat. The endurance of American bombers came at a human cost: long hours in freezing, oxygen, thin cockpits, relentless stress, and the constant threat of death left psychological scars. For every aircraft that returned, some crews were lost entirely. Yet this human endurance was inseparable from technological and tactical resilience. Observers on both sides noted the grim courage required. Young men pressing forward despite frostbite, anti-aircraft bursts, and enemy fighters. The moral dimension of endurance was profound. Survival depended not just on machinery, but on human courage, discipline, and the ability to confront fear repeatedly. Even the Luftwaffe recognized this, remarking on the almost unnatural fortitude of the Americans, who refused to break under punishment. Viewed collectively, these angles converge into a single, remarkable phenomenon. American bomber endurance was a multidimensional force. Human determination, tactical brilliance, leadership foresight, technological resilience, and the resulting psychological impact on the enemy combined to create a strategic advantage. German pilots could not simply outfly the Americans. They had to outthink and outmaneuver a system designed for maximum survival. Each successful sortie reinforced confidence and built a reputation that transcended individual missions. Endurance was no longer merely a measure of distance or flight hours. It became a symbol of operational superiority, a challenge to conventional assumptions about aerial combat, and a defining characteristic of the U.S. daylight bombing campaign. The endurance of American bombers would soon be tested in its most dramatic form. Entire fleets of B-17s and B-24s would penetrate deep into the heart of Germany, facing concentrated anti-aircraft fire and massed Luftwaffe defenses. These missions would crystallize the phenomenon into decisive moments where skill, bravery, and technology intersected, moments that would alter the course of the air war forever. October 14, 1943. The sky over northern Germany is cold, gray, and unyielding. At dawn, the first engines of the 8th Air Force thunder to life across the fields of England. More than 300 B-17 flying fortresses climb into the morning haze, their bomb bays loaded for a mission that would become legend. The second Schweinfurt Regensburg raid. This was no ordinary flight. Targets deep in the industrial heartland, ball-bearing factories, machine shops, and steel plants, were crucial to the German war machine. Success or failure would reverberate across both sides of the Atlantic. The Luftwaffe awaited, spread along anticipated flight paths, fighters poised for interception. As the American formations crossed the North Sea, radar blips flickered along German screens. Pilots braced, some for the first time confronting the reality of a mission that would last over 8 hours. Cold air whipped through unheated cockpits, oxygen masks frosting at extreme altitude. Engines hummed steadily, each vibration a reminder of mechanical reliability tested to the edge. Below, waves of anti-aircraft fire erupted, black puffs marking the invisible death waiting in the sky. German fighters attacked in coordinated groups. Head-on assaults tore into the formations, tracers crisscrossing like fiery threads. Yet the B-17's engines burning, wings flexing, held their lines. Tail gunners fired relentlessly, strafing attackers before they could break through. Pilots adjusted in real time, altitude and speed synchronized across dozens of aircraft. One bomber, riddled with flak, lost a rudder and 2 engines, yet maintained altitude, propelled forward by sheer momentum and reinforced wings. Observing this, German pilots began to murmur disbelief. These planes, they realized, were almost impossible to bring down in formation. The human element compounded the drama. Crew members cramped from long hours, hands raw from frost, faces streaked with soot and sweat. Every gunner, bombardier, and navigator knew that a single lapse could mean catastrophe. Yet endurance carried them forward. Pilots executed precise maneuvers to evade fighters, sometimes banking sharply, sometimes climbing steadily through flak corridors. Bombardiers peered through the Norden sight, calculating, adjusting, ensuring that each payload hit the factory lines below. Every successful drop was a triumph of coordination, endurance, and nerves. The first strike at Regensburg tested the crew's limits. German flak erupted, guns firing in rhythmic bursts, turning the sky into a maelstrom of black smoke and shrapnel. Multiple B-17s were hit, engines smoking, fuselages torn, yet the formation pressed on. Engineers and pilots had designed these bombers to withstand punishment. Now, in real time, their resilience was proving decisive. The Germans, anticipating catastrophic disruption, were forced to adapt. Only the most experienced Luftwaffe pilots attempted to engage, cautious of the overlapping fields of defensive fire. Reports later captured the frustration. Bomber after bomber pressed forward, some barely airworthy, yet unbroken. After completing the Regensburg strike, the lead group veered north toward Schweinfurt. The second target of the day. Fatigue had begun to bite, but endurance persisted. The crew relied on disciplined procedures, fuel checks, engine management, formation corrections, and continuous vigilance for enemy aircraft. Each hour in the air reinforced the notion that these were no ordinary machines. They were steel fortresses carrying men who had been tested to the brink and refused to yield. For German pilots, witnessing the same formation, after hours of pursuit, was astonishing. Planes that should have fallen had pressed on, engines still running, defensive guns still firing, bombs delivered. By mid-afternoon, the mission climaxed as crews faced concentrated flak over Schweinfurt. The sky erupted into a deadly mosaic of anti-aircraft bursts, tracer rounds, and the roar of intercepting fighters. Yet the B-17s maintained formation, some barely limping on two engines. Pilots adjusted in split-second decisions. Navigators recalculated paths over scorched towns and industrial centers. Gunners fired until fingers were numb, and bombardiers released payloads with exacting precision. The endurance of both men and machines had reached its ultimate test, demonstrating that American daylight bombing was not only possible, it was formidable beyond prior imagination. The Schweinfurt Regensburg raid would later be remembered not just for destruction inflicted on German industry, but for the demonstration of human and mechanical endurance. It crystallized the phenomenon that German pilots had long struggled to comprehend, that these bombers could stay aloft, coordinated and effective, despite withering attacks and extreme fatigue. Every mile flown, every maneuver executed, and every bomb dropped underscored a simple but powerful truth: American bombers could endure longer than anyone expected, reshaping the air war over Europe. As the Schweinfurt portion of the mission unfolded, the sky over central Germany became a crucible. The American formations, already exhausted from hours in the air, faced the Luftwaffe's most determined counterattacks. Waves of Messerschmitt Bf-109s and Foch Wolf Falu 190s surged from above and the flanks, engines screaming, bullets tracing lethal arcs through the gray sky. Anti-aircraft fire erupted in rhythmic explosions, black puffs marking where shrapnel sought to claim another bomber. The combination of flak and fighter assaults pushed both men and machines to their absolute limits. Crew members, cramped and frostbitten, fought simultaneously against human fatigue and mechanical adversity. Pilots executed evasive maneuvers with precision, banking sharply or climbing steeply to avoid both flak bursts and diving fighters. Tail gunners rotated positions rapidly, tracking incoming aircraft, while waist and nose gunners fired until their arms shook from exhaustion. Bombardiers, eyes frozen to the Norden sights, made split-second adjustments as engines shuddered and fuselages rattled from impact. Each second was a battle of nerve as much as skill, a test of endurance that would define the mission. Several bombers were hit severely. One B-17 lost an engine and part of its stabilizer, but remained in formation, relying on fellow aircraft for cover and guidance. Another suffered fuselage damage, smoke trailing from its No. 2 engine, yet its crew held course, delivering bombs on target before limping back toward England. Observers later described these incidents as almost surreal. The aircraft were battered, their crews exhausted, yet they pressed forward. German pilots expressed both frustration and disbelief. How could a plane continue to function with such punishment? And how could men maintain focus under relentless fire? The Luftwaffe's head on attacks, considered the most effective tactic, inflicted some losses, but the combat box formations minimized their impact. Any single bomber that fell was mourned, yet the overall structure persisted, enabling other planes to continue toward their objectives. Coordination and discipline were paramount. Minor deviations risked entire formations breaking apart, exposing dozens of aircraft to lethal fire. Leadership in the air, by squadron and group commanders, ensured that these adjustments were made seamlessly, guiding the battered fleet through waves of enemy fire toward their target zones. Amid the chaos, acts of heroism became visible. Gunners fired continuously despite frostbitten fingers. Pilots executed impossible maneuvers to shield crippled aircraft. And navigators recalculated courses over bombed cities, keeping the formation intact. Every member of the crew contributed to the mission's survival, exemplifying a level of endurance that transcended the technical capabilities of the aircraft themselves. These human acts, combined with the bombers' inherent durability, turned what could have been a catastrophic ordeal into a testament of American resilience. By late afternoon, the strike was complete. Bombs had fallen on Schweinfurt's ball, bearing factories, critical nodes of the German war machine. The Luftwaffe, despite concentrated attacks, had been unable to break the formations entirely, and many American bombers began the arduous return flight across hostile airspace. Engines still throbbed with life, wings still flexed under stress, and gunners remained vigilant against any lingering threats. German pilots, surveying the remnants of the fleet, retreating toward England, were left in awe of what they had witnessed. The aircraft that should have been destroyed still flying, crews still functioning under extreme duress. The Schweinfurt Regensburg raid crystallized a turning point in the European air war. It demonstrated that American bombers could endure sustained enemy fire, navigate hundreds of miles of hostile territory, and deliver their payloads with remarkable precision. Losses were significant, yet the operation proved the viability of long-range daylight bombing, a strategy previously doubted by both Allied and German commanders. For the Luftwaffe, it was a moment of stark realization. Traditional interception tactics would no longer suffice, and the Americans had introduced a new variable into the air war: endurance, both mechanical and human, as a strategic weapon. As the battered formations limped home, exhausted crews looked toward the horizon with a mixture of relief and grim determination. Their endurance had carried them through flak, fighters, and fatigue. The mission's success, tempered by loss, signaled that the air war over Europe had irrevocably changed. German pilots could no longer rely solely on skill or numbers. The Americans' combination of technology, training, and human resolve had set a new standard. From the high-altitude battlefields above Germany to the ground below, the reverberations of this endurance would shape the strategies, tactics, and morale of both sides for months to come. The return flight from Schweinfurt and Regensburg was a grim testament to the costs of endurance. Engines sputtered and wings shuddered under damage inflicted by flak and fighters. Of the more than 300 B-17s that took off, 60 were lost in combat, another 17 crash-landed or were abandoned over Europe. Hundreds of airmen were killed, wounded, or captured as prisoners of war. Yet, amid the human toll, the mission underscored a stark reality: American bombers could complete long-range daylight raids. Despite formidable opposition, their endurance had transformed what once seemed impossible into operationally feasible. Strategically, the raid struck a critical blow to German industry. Schweinfurt's ball bearing factories, essential for maintaining tanks, aircraft, and artillery, suffered severe damage. Production lines slowed, supply chains faltered, and the Germans were forced into emergency repairs under constant threat of further strikes. While the Luftwaffe adapted, deploying additional fighter units and adjusting flak concentrations, the Americans had proven that their formations could withstand concentrated enemy fire long enough to deliver significant industrial disruption. The raid sent a clear signal: the United States could project air power deep into the Reich, with persistence and endurance as its key weapons. The psychological impact on both sides was profound. American crews returned exhausted, yet emboldened by the knowledge that their aircraft had survived what had previously been considered lethal missions. Morale, despite heavy casualties, remained high, fueled by a sense of accomplishment and technological confidence. For German pilots, the mission was a moment of stark revelation. Reports and memoirs described the mix of admiration and frustration that permeated Luftwaffe units. Pilots and commanders could no longer assume that superior skill alone would suffice. They were forced to confront the resilience of the enemy and the unyielding coordination of American formations. The endurance demonstrated during the raid also influenced Allied planning. Operational doctrines evolved to exploit what had been learned about the capabilities of the B-17 and B-24. Crews were trained further in long-range navigation, formation maintenance, and damage management. Commanders studied the failures and successes of Schweinfurt, Regensburg to refine future missions, balancing risk and reward while maximizing the strategic value of daylight bombing. The raid reinforced the importance of preparation, coordination, and technological reliability as cornerstones of operational success. Casualty reports, meticulously documented by both sides, highlighted the extraordinary resilience required. German accounts often emphasized the improbability of surviving sustained anti-aircraft fire while under constant fighter threat. American records noted the extraordinary efforts of ground crews, engineers, and support staff who ensured that aircraft could fly again despite extensive damage. The endurance was not isolated to the pilots and gunners. It extended to the entire logistical chain, from assembly lines in the United States to airfields in England. Every mile flown reflected a network of human and mechanical endurance that spanned continents. In the immediate aftermath, questions arose within the U.S. command about how to further leverage this advantage. Could longer missions target deeper German industrial centers? Could formation discipline and bomber durability be exploited to wear down the Luftwaffe over time? These reflections led to increasingly ambitious raids, aiming to cripple critical components of the German war machine and test the limits of both men and machines. German countermeasures intensified, but the pattern was clear: American endurance had redefined the parameters of strategic bombing. By the time the last returning B-17 touched down on English soil, the significance of the mission was evident. Losses were steep, yet the operation, had proven a central thesis of American air strategy. Disciplined crews in resilient aircraft could penetrate the heart of enemy territory and survive long enough to accomplish objectives that would have been unthinkable months earlier. The endurance demonstrated during Schweinfurt Regensburg would reverberate in subsequent missions, shaping both Allied strategies and German defensive doctrines. The skies over Europe had shifted. Where once the Luftwaffe had dominated with speed and firepower, now endurance, mechanical, human, and tactical, dictated the tempo of war. The Germans would continue to adapt, but the example set by American bombers would be a standard that they struggled to match. The endurance of the aircraft and crews had turned the tide in subtle but decisive ways, setting the stage for future confrontations that would define the air war over the Reich. In the months following Schweinfurt Regensburg, the strategic reverberations of endurance became increasingly apparent. German air defenses were stretched thin, forced to cover a wider swath of territory with increasingly predictable, yet resilient American bomber formations. The Luftwaffe intensified training, developed specialized interceptor tactics, and deployed additional flak batteries along critical industrial corridors. Still, the Americans had demonstrated a principle that would redefine aerial warfare: durability, precision, and human fortitude could overcome even concentrated opposition. The cumulative effect on Allied strategy was profound. Planners recognized that the success of daylight bombing relied not on speed or stealth alone, but on the synergy between technological reliability and disciplined crew endurance. Subsequent raids grew deeper into the Reich, targeting synthetic oil plants, aircraft factories, and transportation hubs, essential to Germany's war machine. Each mission tested and expanded the operational range of B-17s and B-24s, reinforcing a growing sense of inevitability. The Americans could sustain pressure where others had faltered. Endurance had become a weapon in itself, a persistent, measurable force that eroded the Luftwaffe's ability to dominate the skies. For German pilots, the psychological impact was stark. Memoirs and combat reports describe a dawning awareness that American crews were systematically redefining aerial combat. Attempts at disruption and attrition met with astonishing resilience. Even when bombers returned battered, with engines smoking or control surfaces damaged, their formations remained largely intact, presenting the same tactical challenge as when they had taken off. The Luftwaffe faced the dual challenge of matching American technology and coping with an enemy whose human endurance seemed inexhaustible. Confidence gave way to frustration, forcing a reconsideration of how to protect critical targets from increasingly daring and determined raids. Morale among American crews, while tempered by heavy losses, remained robust. Veterans of Schweinfurt Regensburg passed on lessons learned. Formation discipline, coordinated fire, and relentless vigilance were as critical as piloting skill. New crews absorbed these insights, integrating endurance into the cultural fabric of the 8th Air Force. The concept of "finish the mission no matter the cost" became both a tactical and moral principle, a creed that reinforced resilience under fire. Ground crews, engineers, and logistical teams also internalized the importance of reliability, ensuring that damaged aircraft returned to the skies as quickly as possible. In this ecosystem of human and mechanical endurance, every role contributed to the broader demonstration of strategic power. The industrial consequences were equally significant. Schweinfurt's ball-bearing plants, vital to the production of tanks, aircraft, and artillery, experienced sustained disruption. Even temporary halts in output reverberated across the German war economy, delaying maintenance and reducing combat readiness. The Americans had proven that repeated, high-risk daylight raids could achieve strategic objectives, despite formidable defenses. Endurance, both in the air and on the ground, had created a lever for systematic pressure on Germany's war infrastructure. Ultimately, the raid exemplified a transformation in air warfare. The concept of endurance, mechanical reliability, tactical cohesion, and human resilience became a defining metric of operational effectiveness. German pilots and planners were forced to adapt continuously. Yet the Americans' combination of technology, strategy, and courage consistently outmatched their opponents. The precedent set during these missions would influence the planning of subsequent operations, from Berlin to the Ruhr Valley, shaping the trajectory of the European air war. By the end of 1943, the implications were clear. American daylight bombing, anchored in endurance, had become a strategic weapon capable of penetrating Germany's industrial heart. Losses were significant, yet the combination of crew skill, technological design, and unwavering discipline allowed the Allies to project power where previously impossible. German pilots, confronted with the unrelenting resilience of American bombers, gained a new, sobering perspective on the war in the air. The stage was now set for reflection. The endurance demonstrated in Schweinfurt Regensburg was more than a tactical victory. It had reshaped the human, mechanical, and strategic dimensions of air warfare, leaving a lasting imprint on both sides and altering the course of World War II over Europe. The endurance of American bombers over Germany was more than a test of engines or wings. It was a testament to human resolve. Men huddled in freezing cockpits, eyes numb and hands raw, faced relentless fire and mechanical strain. Yet they pressed forward, guided by training, discipline, and a shared purpose that transformed fear into focused action. Each mission was a measure not only of skill but of courage, where survival depended on precision, coordination, and the refusal to yield to exhaustion or danger. This endurance reshaped the very nature of aerial warfare. The B-17s and B-24s were more than machines, they were symbols of resilience, combining technological innovation with human determination. The Germans, witnessing planes return battered yet unbroken, were forced to reconsider the limits of conventional strategy. The psychological weight of this realization, seeing an enemy that could absorb punishment and still strike, altered tactics, planning, and the morale of both sides. It was a quiet, relentless form of power, one that left as deep an imprint on minds as it did on factories and supply lines. Yet the story of endurance is also the story of humanity in extremis. It reminds us that technology alone cannot win wars. It must be wielded by individuals capable of extraordinary focus, courage, and perseverance. The Schweinfurt Regensburg raid, and countless others like it, demonstrated that human resolve can amplify machines, strategies, and formations, creating effects that are both tangible and symbolic. Ultimately, the legacy of these missions endures not merely in historical records or industrial disruption, but in the principle that endurance of body, mind, and machine is a decisive force. It redefined the air war, influenced strategic thinking, and left a lasting testament to the courage of those who flew beyond the edge of fear. The skies above Europe had been transformed, and through endurance, American bombers had shown that even in the face of overwhelming odds, resilience could prevail.